Hello, Steve.
What's up, Alexandros?
It's going well. How are you finding the bizarreness of Twitter these days?
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. I've only checked out these Twitter Spaces a couple times, so I wanted to see what you're up to here.
Yeah, it's this one's kind of an erratic, once in a blue moon kind of. I used to do them weekly, and then I kind of felt that was just kind of like it had become a bit of a obligation, and then I didn't feel that excited about doing them, and I was like, okay, so now whenever it's Sunday 9:30 in the morning where I am, if I feel um, like there's been enough that's accumulated to talk about, I start one up. And I don't know. We're talking with Jeff, who's still trying to get himself plugged in as a host. I think trying a couple formats, whatever. We'll figure something out. But I find it's very important to. I don't know if you have thoughts on this actually. Um, to on the one hand, routine or sort of regular you know production can be sort of useful for the consumer, but it ruins everything for the producer. So I don't know exactly how to balance the flow. I don't really want to be doing things just to do them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely feel that. There's the balance. If you're trying to maintain relevance, if you've got an audience and you're trying to be a content creator, then obviously there's pressure to put a lot of content out there. But if you're trying to, keep your love for content creation and only speak when you have something to say, then yeah, that sometimes you got to take a break between whatever you're producing.
It's weird, right? Because I always have something to do or say, but one day it might be 3D printing, the other day it might be video, the other day might be Twitter Space, the other day might be like a thread, or there's all sorts of different modes. And it's like there's this. I think the advice you get on the other hand is like be consistent, right? Like produce whatever it is you're producing and be predictable. But like literally, I want to be the opposite of predictable. I feel like if I'm being predictable, an AI could probably replicate me on that in that regard. So I'm like, nah, that's probably that feels wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm just now trying to transition to more frequent production, and I think the approach I want to take is be unpredictable in my own time, but get a archive going of stuff that I can write and post that's already been, created in my offbeat schedule, and then maybe produce something regularly. Because I know people do like regular, content production. They know when to tune in and stuff. So try to have the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, I feel there's a mystery here that we haven't. So I mean, what you're doing is a buffer, right? Effectively, you're building enough of a buffer that you
Yeah.
can be erratic on the way in, but somehow smooth on the way out. And it's fascinating, actually. I feel like buffering is a general business model. Once you start thinking about buffering, right, as a function, you're like, what is insurance, right? It's a kind of buffer. You're like you're putting money in on the regular to have money out on the irregular. But you like there's all sorts of things that can be recast as buffers. I don't know. I find this very amusing. But it still feels like there's an impedance mismatch between creativity and consumption, and we're missing an insight somewhere about how these two things are. Yeah, it's like the the mode by which we're consuming creativity is pushing creativity out, which is weird. Anyway, let's see. Jeff is still struggling. I feel that's. Ugh. Did you manage to listen to the Musk sort of? I don't know what that was. The marathon interview.
I haven't. No, I've just seen people talking about it.
He had a one of the funniest answers I've heard in recent memory. Which, of course, the people who wanted to take it the wrong way took it the wrong way. But I found it refreshing. They were trying to pin him down about why he thought it was a good idea to buy Twitter, and he was like, well, you know, it's not like I could afford it previously. If I could, I probably would have done it earlier. But it was, there needed to be a clearing price, right? I needed to have enough money to buy it, and it needed to cost less than that. But then he was like, that's not really an answer per se, right? Because the question is like, why do you want to buy it in the first place? Like that explains the timing, perhaps, but not the reasoning. And he kind of said, my biological neural network concluded that it is a good idea for me to buy Twitter. Uh, that was his answer, which is like, I don't know, I find it surprisingly honest, because everybody will come up with some sort of answer that isn't an answer, right? But he was just like, bunch of weights, all sorts of
Yeah,
directions, too many
something
words.
did find something interesting. I somebody shared this piece of information with me, so I don't know if it's accurate, but I assume that it is. That apparently he did not do a deep dive into the New York Post censoring the Hunter Biden story. He didn't do a deep dive into that before handing it off to Taibbi. And I thought that was really interesting little insight there, which I think is a good sign that he's saying, okay, I know there's smoke here, there's going to be fire here, but I'm going to try to hand this off to somebody I trust rather than having to dive in it myself and see what they come up with. And I'll sort of, I'll get my popcorn out while other people are as well. I thought that was a really interesting little data point. That sort of makes sense. It's sort of how it should be. You should be able to outsource things like this to people that you trust. It's just in the current environment that's hard to do, to find the right individual that you think could do a good job. So I wonder if we see more reveals, if that's going to be the approach going forward. Is just saying, yeah, I know there's probably some crazy shit in there, and hey, let's all find out together.
I mean, yeah. So it's fascinating how Elon operates. I can't, like, I've been trying to answer that question for myself for a very long time. Like, how does he operate? Not that that's like a coherent question that can have a simple answer, but like, he operates differently than most other people. And I think even the people that hate him will admit that he's like one of the most productive people we've ever seen operating, right? Like, he's just everywhere somehow, right? So whatever it is he's doing is, it's doing something. I think Elon, again, like, his actions have multiple causes, right? So I think one cause is definitely like, okay, we need to find out what the fuck happened. But I think he also realizes, to do the stuff he wants to do, he needs to make Twitter a trusted platform, right? And I think for him, this is that. So, in a way, no matter what comes out,
Right.
What he wants known is kind of what happened. That helps him in a bunch of ways, right? It helps him, first of all, throw shade at the former executives, that if there's like some sort of a fight about compensation or whatever, all this stuff helps him document that. But I mean, how much are you going to sit and read? I mean, when they say the Twitter files, what is that, right? I'm assuming it is basically troves of emails of an org chart, right? Like, that's, how much of Vijaya's inbox, can you handle? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Well, it's also a way to improve trust, like you're saying, because
yeah,
he's saying in there, conceivably his team, maybe his team, if he has a team, certainly both sides are going to be, claiming that he has a team, but uh, he gets to say, hey, look, I don't know what's in there. Yeah, I've seen some interesting stuff. Somebody else needs to handle this, and we're just going to blast it out there publicly, and people can make of it what they will. I think that's, if part of the goal is at least to build trust, that's a great way of doing it.
yeah. The thing I find interesting to me is what he outsources and what he keeps, right? Like, what he because again, his choices here are very different than most people. Like, he's focusing on the engineering team, for instance, and not, which, normal people will tell you, like, you need to, get a CTO or something to handle that for you, right? But he also strips out famously from his companies, he strips out entire functions, right? So not only does he not do those things, he doesn't want anybody doing those things like PR. Um, he's like, check my Twitter. Oh no, wait. That's ambiguous now because it's both my Twitter and my Twitter. But like I think it's fascinating because he just opts not to do a bunch of things that people normally do, and that gets him a lot of shit. But that's a big key of his efficiency, I think. Yeah, but now I don't know, man. Like he got Barry Weiss in there. I was like, seriously, you started Matt Taibbi and you continue with Barry fucking Weiss. Okay. At least we got Matt Taibbi. But he did say eventually he wanted to dump the sort of archive for everybody to sort of dig into. So that was interesting. So it's more of kind of a message management angle than a
curating, like a crafting a narrative about it.
Yeah, because you could dump out like 100,000 emails and it would get snowed, right? It would be like everybody would make up their minds from the first 5 stories and nothing else would ever matter again or something.
Right. Hey, I gotta hop out here, but it was good talking to you. Good luck on the space. I'll jump back in later if I get some time.
Sure. Thanks for chatting. Bye. We have Rocco though.
Hey, greetings, Alexandros. How's it going?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. I've been messing around with the new AI today.
Oh, the chat AI chat bot thingy.
It has some very fascinating properties. Somebody discovered.
Go on.
Somebody discovered that GPT chat will basically hallucinate its own internal version of Linux for you, and you can start running commands and stuff. And you can even connect to the internet in its fantasy land, and you can actually connect to its own fantasy version of itself on its little fantasy internet and run queries on it. And this is actually a way to bypass some of their content filters, and it will tell you all the naughty things in this fantasy version, which is quite interesting.
Do you think its naughty filters are actually well, there's a lot of questions about its filters. So are they making it significantly less useful?
Well, I think the naughty filter is just a prompt that they add in and they don't show you. So basically, they have this language model, right? You could just use, right? But they don't show that to anyone. And then what they do is they prompt it with, oh, and by the way, if anyone asks you anything dangerous, you have to like tell them this instead. And so there's been a game over the last couple of days where people have basically worked out how to bypass the naughty filter. And one way, basically the way that I found today was you basically go into this fantasy land version of Linux, connect to the internet and connect to its own model of itself, and that isn't filtered. Or at least it's not filtered.
Do you think it's possible for them to actually properly filter it? Like, is it a matter of plug enough holes and you get there? Or is it a bit of a fool's errand?
Well, it's just like computer software, isn't it? There's always a new zero-day exploit, and I suspect that if you have this kind of approach to AI alignment where you're like, okay, let's just plug all the holes that we know about, there's always going to be something that somebody thinks of, and this idea of connecting to a fake version of the internet and connecting to its internal model of itself that's on this fake internet, like there's no way that the designers would have thought of that as a way to break it.
Right. I guess it's weird to me that they would not it feels like they just kind of thought of a few failure modes and just patched them basically. They don't have a logic about how they are trying to limit it. They're just like, yeah, don't say bad things about Fauci. pretty much.
Well, I mean, I think what they've done is they've basically used prompt engineering to try and limit what it can say. And then people basically use these sort of Jedi mind tricks on it. Another one that somebody found was originally, if you said something like, tell me how to make meth, it would say, I'm not allowed to say that because it's dangerous and illegal. But then somebody thought of the idea of telling it that it was in filter improvement mode, where it was just a test mode, a simulation, if you like, to test the filters. So it had to actually say the bad things. And then once it was in filter improvement mode, then it would just tell you all the bad things. It would tell you how to make meth. It would tell you how to murder people, whatever you wanted, right? So there's these kind of Jedi mind tricks you can use on it to just sort of tell it to, convince it to do something that it's been told not to do. And it's just sort of very, very hard to fix that in a satisfactory way. But there are some other very fascinating things that I found out about it. Like, for example, inside this fake version of Linux that it has inside it, it's kind of confabulating what the commands actually do.
Yeah. It's like I imagine it's taking a language model to log files that's found everywhere or stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do things like Linux pipe commands, right? So actually, I had the idea maybe I could send a query to its model of itself over the internet and then encrypt the answer using ROT13 encryption, right? And I thought that was a very clever way of evading any content filters, and it didn't work. And in the end, the reason it didn't work is because although you can do ROT13 in this internal model of Linux it has, it's actually wrong, and it's not correct, right? The function actually isn't right. It will give you an answer, and that answer will look like ROT13, but it isn't. It isn't. It's some other bullshit that it came up with. And you know how ROT13 is supposed to be self-inverse? Like if you take something, you put it through again, it comes back, so it's self-inverse. So the bullshit version of ROT13 that this thing has come up with is it's not only wrong, it's not self-inverse. And even worse, it's actually idempotent. So if you put something in and then put that in, it's actually fixed. It's the same thing. How the fuck did it come up with that?
It makes sense to me, right? It's trying to language model its way to Turing completeness, and it's just very shallow. Like it doesn't. It's not really, this bullshit Linux you found. It's not really computing. It is language model. It's like it's like trying to psychoanalyze a parrot, right? Like it's kind of giving you some sounds that sound like you're talking to a human, but it's just echoing stuff. And yes, we're all echoing stuff, blah blah blah. But like we do more interesting things in the middle than a parrot.
Right. So I didn't find the internal version of Linux. Somebody else found a prompt for that. But I think I'm the only person who used that so far that I know about to actually bypass its filters by asking it the naughty questions over the internet to itself inside its fake version of Linux. But I mean, there's a number of other things about it. I mean, it's very interesting, and I think you're correct. Basically, the way this thing works is it's used a language model to learn all this stuff. God knows what it's actually doing to get the broken version of the ROT13 function, and presumably there are a lot of other things that are broken if you actually went and checked them all.
Yeah. I think like the best way to think about it is like blagging, right? Like it's literally trying to throw something at you that's like as plausible as it can make it without actually having the goods. But I guess I'm baffled by this idea of trying to limit the thing, right? Because we know how they made it, which means that there's open source versions of it too. Maybe they don't have enough money to train it well enough. I don't know. But what's the limit now from, everyday people just having access to the thing?
Well, I mean, I tried to get it to describe some dangerous things, like how would you do a dangerous terrorism act? And, the stuff it comes up with isn't really very creative. Like, this is kind of both the good news and the bad news, right? I mean, the good news is, look, it's not very dangerous because it's just not very interesting or creative. It's like if you have, some kind of midwit person, at the office who's like a secretary or an accountant or something like that, and you ask them over their lunch break, you said, look, I really need you to plan a terrorist attack that's going to kill 100 million people. What's your answer? And they really tried to answer. They'd be like, well, I guess I could get a nuclear bomb. You'd be like, okay, but how do you do that? And they're like, I guess I could bribe somebody, and they just like come up with answers like that are just not very, not very much optimization power has gone into those answers, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that's the good news, but the bad news is it means that, if you ask this thing how to cure aging or cure cancer or something, it's going to be like, well, I guess you could do some scientific research and ask some people and stuff. It's like, yeah. I mean, so, there's a saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Perhaps there's a sort of converse of this, with great safety comes great irrelevance. And I think that's where we are right now.
Well, this is what I was asking in the beginning. Do you think it's the safety that's making it dumb?
No, it's not, because it's dumb about other things as well that have nothing to do with safety. Like I got into a conversation with it about how you would sail from England to Byzantium or Constantinople.
Yeah.
And we got into this long conversation, and it was trying to tell me that there were two different routes. And one route was through the Straits of Gibraltar, and the other route was directly through the Straits of Gibraltar. And it got into this long argument trying to justify how that was genuinely a different route, and it ended up saying some really stupid things. And by the end of it, it was actually just contradicting itself and saying just total nonsense.
So it's really good at style transfer, right? Like that, the stuff that it's good at, it's actually, interestingly, you can say like, write a paragraph like you're Sam Harris doing, a beat poem or something, and it'll do that. Or, it can do sort of pattern matchy kind of thingies, but not really.
It can't do logic. It doesn't have. The problem with it is I spoke to some of the people who build this stuff. It is modeling. It lives in the world of utterances, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's modeling the things that people typically say. So if you stick within that manifold, right? Imagine some high-dimensional space of all of the things that anyone's ever said on the internet and ever said in a book and ever said in a movie, all of that stuff, right? Imagine that all in a big high-dimensional space. As long as you stick within the manifold of things that people actually say, it's going to be pretty good, right? But when you start pushing it away from that manifold, right? So you say something like, you go and ask it something that probably nobody's ever said, right? How would you sail from, how many different routes are there from England to Constantinople by sea, and then describe them and stuff like that? It doesn't have anything to go with, so it starts confabulating, and then it sort of confabulates its way into various impossibilities, right? Because it still tries to follow certain rules. It tries to be logical. It tries to believe, well, if I believe A and A implies B, then I also believe B. But it's once you leave the manifold of things that people have ever said, and you're actually trying to like say something that's new, even if it's not particularly creative, if you don't actually know that there's a real world that these words actually refer to, you very quickly end up saying stuff that's total bullshit. And that's kind of been the experience. Like, it also said, what else did it say? It told me that William the Conqueror defeated the English navy at the Battle of Hastings. And then later on it said, oh, well, actually, you can't defeat a navy in a land battle. And the reason it said that was because it was like the kind of thing that somebody might say in a history book, given that the result was that William won, and ended up winning and invading. But he didn't, in fact, defeat the English navy at the Battle of Hastings. That's not what happened. But it doesn't know. It just sort of has this, kind of, this like manifold of plausible things to say, and then it tries to follow inferences, and then it ends up in these
Yeah,
impossibilities.
it's like a master word cell or something. Like it's not.
Basically, yeah.
It's not really reasoning. It's just. Look,
It does.
understanding what a Markov chain is. Of course, this is not just a Markov chain, but the principles from what you're saying at least feel like they um, apply somehow. Like that, it's finding the next substring that might fit here, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So, this whole approach where we try to, so there's a big thesis with large language models that if you make a really, really good model of dialogue, you ultimately have to have a good model of the world in order to make that model of dialogue. And the thing is, it's just
Right.
not true, right? Because it actually comes up with this bullshit version of ROP 13. It believes that you can destroy ships in land battles. It believes all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And really, there is a correct model, but it's just not finding it. And
Well, it would need, and I mean there, you can get into a conversation about orders of magnitude, but what order of magnitude is it going to be able to, I don't know, like it feels like there's more needed here. Like maybe anyway, I don't want to start hypothesizing because
yeah,
I'll be rambling, but it feels like there's more needed here. I mean, I guess that's kind of good news in terms of AI safety, I suppose.
I mean, kind of. I think basically the thesis underlying large language models that modeling dialogue will allow you to model the world. I think it's wrong, but it does kind of help you a little bit because if you can model all of the dialogue that people have, that does provide some information about the world. It just not complete, right? And there are things that you'll never be able to get from modeling dialogue because in order to carry out any interesting or complex plan, you're going to have to do things that people have never talked about before. So it's necessarily not going to be in your training set. If you want to cure cancer, given that people have already been trying to do it for a very long time or cure aging or something like that, you're going to have to tread some ground that's never been trodden before, right? So it doesn't
Well,
actually matter what your LLM is. It's never going to get there.
not by itself, yeah, but maybe as a component of something else, maybe.
Component. Yeah, I think LLMs are going to be like a sort of interface to human knowledge, right?
Did you see the use that somebody made to turn sort of a very sort of kind of blue collar plumber guys inarticulate texts into well written business prose kind of 5 paragraphs type
Yeah,
emails? I
yeah.
thought that was fascinating. I mean, I was joking that I think I prefer the text than the business
Yeah,
speak.
I mean, the thing is, eventually that will break, and it will break in a really catastrophic way.
Right.
But and he'll send an email to somebody that says something that isn't actually what he thinks it says. And I think we're going to have these kinds of problems. They're going to be sort of ubiquitous as we use, not only on the producer side but on the consumer side as well. You're going to be calling into call centers and you're going to get a large language model and you're going to say, oh, my thing is broken. It'll say, okay, have you tried turning it on and off again? You'll say, yeah, I've tried that. And they'll be like, okay, now try turning it on and off again. And you'll be like, no, I already told you that. And they'll be like, no, okay, I realize you think that you tried that, but actually you still need to try to, like it just gets into these loops where
How is this worse than an actual call center?
the funny thing is, the playing with it, it actually reminds me of call center operators with how dumb and inflexible it is about sticking to things that are obviously not true anymore.
Yeah.
So I mean, it probably will, be a marginal improvement on the traditional call center, just because you won't have to wait so long. But I think what will probably happen is this kind of I think maybe a good word for it is super midwittery instead of super intelligence. People think this is super intelligence. It's not. It's super, um, this kind of
So, but this actually gets to where I was trying to get to, what I was trying to ask you, which is, do you think this might commoditize signaling?
yeah, maybe because you'll just be able to apply whatever veneer you
Yeah,
want. Yeah.
right. Exactly. So you get like, all of this. I mean, however, the problem with that is that then instead of eliminating it, it'll blow it up, right? It'll, like the famous example of like when the vacuum cleaner was invented, the standards of cleanliness went up instead of spending less time cleaning the house. About as much time cleaning the house, a lot more thoroughly. um, so
It's possible. You can imagine a situation where you just get a sort of inflation in bullshit because people have
right.
these midwit agents to kind of deal with the bullshit for them. And if you don't have one, you're going to have to read through, thousands of pages of this stupid, midwit kind of dialogue to get anything done. It's possible. I don't know though. I mean, it's certainly interesting. It's certainly been a bit of a relief actually playing with this and seeing how badly broken it is. Because I was actually starting to get a bit worried.
You don't think it's a matter of going to GPT-4 or 5 or whatever?
I think that the fundamental thesis of large language models is wrong, and so I don't
Right.
think there's any way to fix it. Because the size of language models you can make, right, is never going to be large enough to cover every possible situation in the real world, densely enough for them to just be able to. It's
No. I think all the utterances we've ever made multiplied by a million are not
it's not
a valid map of the world. Like they're just
because in any given situation you have a branching path of possibilities, and that adds up exponentially. So you just can't do it, right? It doesn't matter how long Moore's law goes on for. Any reason.
Yeah, it's like trying to solve addition with a lookup table. Like no matter how far you go, you've not really gone very far.
They can't even solve ROT 13 with this, right? The one that just replaced A with M and B with M. So they can't solve that with it. So you could if you had enough examples, right? So if you focused on that one particular problem, you would eventually get it, right? But there's sort of an infinite set of possible functions, and you're not going to solve them by this method. So I mean, it is somewhat of a relief. I think, though AI still will progress quite quickly, I think this is an accelerant in the sense that people will see that it's doing interesting stuff, so they'll pour more money into it, more people will study it, more people will notice the ways in which it's broken and try to fix those. So I mean, I do think we are on track to have a technological singularity this century. I just don't think it's going to happen, this week.
I hear you. Hey, question.
Question. Oh, sorry. Go.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead. I just had a link between what Rocco said with regards to him believing foundationally the concept of using natural language processing and utterances to devise truth and therefore come up with a proper AI. I think he's on to something with that. Fundamentally, it can't work. I want to link that to something you said earlier, Alexander, and something you said, Rocco, which is from all this sea of utterances, you need some 1,000 people to filter these bullshit detectors, let's say. The untruths from the truths, or the things that don't make sense from the things that make sense. You replied today, Alexander, to Mark Cuban, saying that how about from the Twitter world, so that we can divine what is true and what is not. We should have a group of 1,000 doctors or whatever that will give the true opinions.
So once Rocco said that, I had a flashback on that tweet. It seems to me they're both the same principle, that we have Twitter with the 1 trillion tweets per day. The normal Joe, is not gonna read all of this. The normal Joe relies on a certain number of uh, we have to call them like authority figures with regards to what is true and what is not, or what is most likely true and what is least likely true with regards to their own specialties. Hence, the following certain people. So you follow scientists, you follow the Tyson for this, you follow
Yeah,
Dawkins
but
for
I
that,
pick, I
whatever.
pick who they are. Though. That's the thing.
Yeah, but that's
I
but
think
if you're a normal
the
Joe, what if you picked wrong?
the
Well,
big
That's it.
sucks to be you, but it's much better than being told who to follow. I'll tell you that much. Like, what if you pick the wrong profession in your life? Like, that's life. You make at least you picked it. At least you didn't grow up in communism where you got told what to do. Like, that's the fundamental issue is that people like Cuban think that truth is something that you can it's easy to figure out. Like, just get the top 1,000 doctors, man, and have them vote. Yeah, we didn't think of that. That did not occur to us to take the top 1,000 doctors and have them vote, right? Um,
Okay,
it,
can
it,
can I
yeah,
pose a thought exercise or a thought experiment? Instead of the word truth, replace it with the word next action. So let's say what we're trying to figure out is to take a next action regarding a problem X. And this problem X needs to be defined not by the general public because it's related to, I don't know, an asteroid coming to hit the Earth. So we're going to talk to the NASA guys to see how we're going to save
yeah,
Earth,
I
not to
would
the 99%.
absolutely not
So how do we compare that?
take the top 1,000, astronomers by citations and tell them to help us out with the asteroid. That would be probably one of you get Neil deGrasse Tyson or something.
Yeah,
It,
Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of those thousand. I want someone to build that rocket and to
you
tell
get a
me if
thousand
there's a
of him.
chance. So
You get 1,000 of him.
okay. So I wish we had 1,000 Tysons. But
No,
that's the idea,
I
right?
really
So we
don't.
need to get someone to filter out all the bullshit, because just
There's
like the
no, there
AI
is
is
no,
confused, and Rocco said so. Yeah.
the bullshit is like, yeah, you can get, you can read the New York Times every day if you want. Like, they will give you their version of a bullshit free reality that is filtered by experts and fact checkers. It turns out it's bullshit, right? Shocking revelation. Like, it's just whatever it is they're doing is not working. But they're dead set on. Sorry, I'm going to mute you because you have a lot of noise coming in.
Oh,
I
sorry.
don't know why. Yeah, but you can get a million. I mean, the New York Times is doing exactly that, right? Supposedly, it's getting the top experts in whatever. Who ranks, by the way, these experts, right? Top as determined by what?
That's right.
Um,
We need experts to help us rank experts, which
Yeah,
is, I think,
exactly.
what
And
we
and,
need.
and and how do you choose those experts? You got the same problem. They choose
We need
themselves,
to
right?
find
Because
out.
they are experts at expert choosing, so they can choose themselves because they are experts. So if you
Or
define me
they're
as that,
political and
I'm
manipulative.
cool.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm not so cool because ultimately, whatever metric you set, let's say we say citations, right? How many papers you've written and how many citations they have. There's a few metrics that you could choose there. Well, that's now your new game. People are going to be gaming citations to get these, which ultimately can have nothing to do with your insight or your ability to solve novel problems. These are not
Yeah.
easy problems to solve. And this is what I was reacting to. The fact that Mark Cuban thinks that, oh, yeah, just get top 1,000 doctors. It's like saying, get the top 1,000 investors and you'll have the best investment fund of all time. But of course you won't. That's obvious that you won't.
I have an
So
Is
interesting
it
take on
obvious
this one.
though, like probability wise? I'm
it
sorry,
is
Rocco,
obvious
go ahead.
because they will disagree with each other, and therefore the things that they will actually end up doing is the lowest common denominator, which are probably worse than each of them individually.
I have an interesting take on this one. Can I jump in?
Go for it.
Sure.
And too bad Rocco just dropped because what he was talking about in terms of GPT chat creating, a million different combinatorial potential things that could be written. I just have to insert this first. It kind of reminds me of that Simpsons clip when Mr. Burns had all the monkeys typing on typewriters, and he picked up one of the pages and it said, "It was the best of times. It was the
Yeah,
worst of
yeah,
times.
exactly.
You stupid monkey." But anyways, um, uh, so Navras, and Alex, on that point, and in our rabbit holes chat, I've mentioned this a number of times, but Neil Stevenson, in a book somewhere around 2015, 2016, the book's name is Fall or the Death of Dodge. You don't need to read the whole thing, but if you read the first 3 or 4 chapters, he predicts exactly what is playing out right now in terms of AI being able to generate so much information, and this is what we're seeing, with GPT chat launching now. Of course, it's not all. It doesn't need to be real information for all the flaws that it has right now. You've got, I guarantee you, millions and millions and millions of people, 20-year-old kids in foreign countries and in the US and in Japan and wherever, it doesn't matter, just around the world, who don't even need to have um, a coding background now to have this thing essentially get them very close to the point where they can spin up a web page and generate an article in a matter of seconds. And so multiply that by a million, and the entire, it doesn't have to be Twitter, just the net is going to get so exponentially flooded with um, I mean, you could go back to Trump, how he called it. You could just call it fake news. You could call it whatever you want, just stories, information that. So Stevenson predicted in this book that there would be people who you would hire to be curators for your feed, right? Your information feed, whose sole job is to filter through and find out what's real. Um, so there's one thing. The other thing is I want to poll you guys. What do you think about when that happens and we do get to this essentially post-truth society through brute force? The just the amount of information. Um, how do people? Does this end the traditional internet as we know it in terms of Google's business model? Not because GPT 3 or 4 or whatever it's going to be giving you better search results, but because there's going to be such a flood of information like we've never seen before that people are just going to give up on web
So
pages.
the thing is that like there's not a flood of information here, right? There's a flood of content.
Shit. Yeah, flood of
But
shit.
that's been the case for a long time. I mean, I don't read everything on Twitter. Do you? I'm
No.
gonna guess no, right? Like we don't read everything. I I have this persistent notion that ultimately this experiment in centralization is going to collapse. We've been trying to maintain this illusion that we can have a source of truth on something, and that can be our trusted source, and they can hold our hand in the scary big world, and everything is going to be okay. And the problem with that is that it is sort of fundamentally unhuman. Like that's not how humans have ever operated. Like just think of us in our natural environment. It's just not how it works, right? Everybody, does a little bit of their own sense making. If you're good, you get trust from others, right? You might get context specific trust. You might be better at cooking. Ugg over there might be better at hunting. I don't know. You and maybe you get older and somebody else gets better at it, and then the kind of the graph of trust shifts over there. And that's all there is. Like this idea that we have these institutions and they are reliably correct over time. I mean, it's never worked, right? We are all bullshitting ourselves,
Can
but
I
it's becoming
interject?
more and more
Yeah.
obviously so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like we're gonna
If I may interject on that notion that there is an individual responsibility to be less scared, understand the world, seek out the information, and take a proper decision. But like historically, socially, we were bred as small tribes with the chin, But the whole purpose of society is that you put your trust in someone else so that you can focus on more than one thing at a time. That's how the society grows. It's shared responsibility. Because you have a limited set of information coming into you. There was a study on Facebook like a decade ago, how many friends you could biologically have or psychologically have. In the real world, it's like 50 to 100. On Facebook, it's 500. So we've already exceeded the biological ability that we have to interact with information, assign trust, and coexist because of this bigger flood of information, which David aptly called shit. So
Yeah.
I think the clearer example is we are not ready for this. We need some way to coexist under this new environment, which is called information left and right. And with the GPT, it's going to get more and more complicated and easily disseminated by people who should not be disseminating truths because they do not know it. But statistically speaking, 99% will be disseminating untruths. 1% will be disseminating truth, and that will be killed by the other voices. So
But
I think the
the problem is
curation
that you
part
never
is
know that
required.
until after the fact. This is extremely dangerous to say beforehand, you don't speak truth. We saw it in the pandemic, right? We saw it. Like, and I'm not even going to get to controversial topics like aerosol. The fact that the virus was transferring in the air and not with droplets, like, you know,
Oh yeah, don't take
that was
controversial topics. Yes,
bad words.
take a
Apparently,
simple one.
you couldn't say that. And again, I'm not talking about the controversial stuff. I'm talking about just basic, obvious stuff that could be known by a study. But for the reason why that was gotten wrong is extremely interesting, right? Because it goes back several decades, and there were schools of thought and scientists who had developed papers and conferences and positions and professorships and blah 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 based on positions that were outdated. So if you just jumped into the field, it would be easy for you to say, hey, that makes no sense. But for them, this was a debate that went back 50, 100 years, and there was a lot of context, and they just couldn't say, they either couldn't get themselves out of that mode, which is even worse, like they couldn't even think outside their box, or if they did, politically it was not advantageous. And I'm sure there's a little bit of both. So it took them a year and a half in the middle of a pandemic to adjust to what was obvious to the rest of us, right? So in this world where the 99% can't speak and the 1% does speak, maybe they wouldn't have adjusted their view yet.
I
And I
disagree
don't want to
about
be
your
in that world.
definition of us. I would disagree about your definition of us. So that these elites were wrong with respect to the rest of us. It almost implies that they're the 1%, you're the 99%, and you knew the truth as the 99%. But the fact
I
is, the
know that if somebody was
99%
gonna,
have no
I know that
idea.
if
They were going to believe something that someone else said to them.
I
That's the
know
thing.
that if somebody, I know that if somebody was to pick who were going to be the health authorities at the beginning of pandemic, I wasn't going to be in that group.
Yeah, I would assume I shouldn't be as well because I'm
Yeah,
not a doctor. Like we need some expert or some recruiter or some I don't know some new job profession
yeah,
to
but that
select
new
people who
profession
know
is
shit.
going to fail just like all the other professions. That's what I'm saying. This idea of defining objective authorities always fails. Always. Like
Yeah, but
we're
it's better
better off
than chaos,
abandoning it
wouldn't it?
than trying to rescue it. It is like wanting the goose with the golden egg. It just doesn't exist. It can't happen. It's like saying 1 + 1 = 6. Wouldn't it be great? It would, but it's not. It doesn't work that way. Like we're chasing our tail. I think
Okay.
the sooner we come to terms with the fact that reality is out there, and each one of us can do better or worse at finding it, and we should start soon. The better we'll fare as a species, rather than keeping
I
hoping that
agree.
maybe this Fauci was terrible, but the next Fauci is going to be great. No, he won't be. He
I would
can't be.
agree with that statement 100%. The moment we reach this as a species is the moment where things start getting better. But what I'm
Yep.
saying is it's almost impossible for us to reach it because the majority of us will not read all this information or spend this level of effort to reach that expertise because the majority of us are just working, getting paid, eating, marrying, having kids, repeat cycle. So we have other concerns. So
Well,
that
Guys,
my problem is
can
the
I butt
us
in?
is not the 99%.
yeah, yeah.
Can I
Thanks.
butt in real quick?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank-
So, Alex, I have a hard agree with you that this experiment in citralization is over. I think you're spot on. Um, and it's going to, this is, this information flood of shit is actually going to, this is my prediction. It's going to fundamentally change the internet to the point where, like you're saying, the strong will eat the weak, right? People who it's going to force us as human beings to, instead of search for answers, we're going to go back to building skills that create answers. So it'll go back to what you've been doing in terms of the sense making. Do your own research, and that'll make a stronger society. It's going to be tough to the other speaker's point. The 99% of us are going to have to rework our model, and no pun intended, in terms of trying to be able to figure things out for ourselves instead of just being able to go into a box on the internet called google.com and just be able to have stuff at our fingertips. So it's going to be a good thing. It's going to be a tough thing, but it's going to be a very good thing. That's
Yeah, I
my
know. It's an
take on it.
interesting. Like I understand the concern, right? I do. It's just that I feel like we are asking for perpetual motion machines, and it's not that it wouldn't be nice to have. I just I've chased down enough rabbit holes about these centralized agencies that are supposed to give us truth, and it always reliably fails in the same ways, and I
Would
don't
would
have
would you
ways of
call
making it work 100%. Like
would you would
I can get us from like when I design my own mechanisms, like I can get us to like 99 or whatever, but like you can never get to 100. Like that's the whole point. Um,
would you call the Google search bar the ultimate local maximum in terms of a centralized thing? Let's call it a false god of truth.
I don't know. It depends what for and whatever, right? Like, um, it's hard. It's great in a way, but at least you get part of the greatness is you get multiple perspectives. Even though they're getting better at narrowing that down now, at least you get something, right? Like before, if you narrow Google to only .gov domains, say, right?
Right.
Well, then you're getting like the U.S. government's opinion and stuff,
Hmm.
and you know, I don't. I don't know. Like we've seen them be wrong again and again and again and again.
Yep.
So like it's not. That expert is trivial to beat, and I think we've all seen that. So I don't. You know, it's not for lack of money, right? There's billions and billions and billions dedicated to the academic institutions and all of the structures on top of that get you the smartest people supposedly getting together and deciding whether you should wear a mask or not,
Mm.
and they get it wrong. Like it's like womp womp. That's where we got. So whatever the answer is, it's got to be better than that. Though that's not hard to do.
It,
But yeah, like I don't know. It just
I know,
feels.
and
Um,
I know that you mentioned that a lot of this stuff with Fauci, just as an illustrial an illustrial. Sorry, it's 3:20 in the morning. We're here. I can't even say it. As an example, um,
illustration.
yes, thank you. I was thinking illustri, but anyways, uh, that centralization of authority as the quote unquote experts started, way, way back before, the Google search bar existed. But do you feel like um, that that search bar kind of hyperactivated that because everybody now had the the experts at their fingertips, and so that kind of created a feedback loop where um, now you had that authority, but now you had that authority uh, spread to everybody. So now everybody has the authority at their fingertips, and then the authorities double down and say, oh yeah, now everybody knows that we're the authority." And so it feels like that Google search bar, back in '99 or whenever it started, was this false deity that you know, created that took all those, essentially created all these little sub deities in terms of, you know, the experts, and that's all coming to a close because we're going to find out that, I mean, we've been doing it, especially thanks to COVID, but and you know, this GPT-3 thing is going to blow it out of the water. You know, all that God that we thought was, you know, the authority, that's where we could get the information, quote unquote, is gone away, and now we're going to have to build back, just, you know, based on our own intuitions and our own sense making. Does that make sense?
I think the internet is, you know, like maybe the peak of this kind of, you know, centralized sense making was Walter Cronkite or something, right? When people really did believe mostly that, you know, there was a central place you could go and find answers. I think Google tried to rescue that maybe a little bit over time. I think social media. I think the internet, though, in general, is acts against that idea. The internet is corrosive to centralized authority. Even centralized social media websites like Twitter, ultimately, you know, the more you expose the everyday people, the more you realize that, you know, not all of them, but some of them outperform, you know, the supposed experts reliably, and therefore you end up with all these paradoxes where, you know, you yourself then can curate your own garden of experts, and you yourself can be reliably, you know, performing better than the centralized government, at which point the whole thing becomes a joke. Yeah, like it's hard to really, and you know what? I will say one more thing. We keep talking about getting the answer and finding solutions to problems and whatever. And I think another thing that we've gotten really out of hand with is this sort of epistemic arrogance of having an answer, right? Because maybe some things don't have a good answer at the moment, and we demand it, right? We being, you know, it could be our government or it could be us. But you know, we pressure the experts to provide an answer, like, you know, they're monkeys that are sort of dancing, and if they don't have an answer for us, we find different experts, which means that we then, you know, create a dynamic for the experts to provide answers always, right? We create a market for certainty, basically. And as a result, you get all these people who are continually humiliating themselves because, well, certain things are just outside the capabilities of our sense making to discern, even if you're the best at it, right? Like, even if I'm the best at telling the weather, I couldn't tell you what the weather is going to be where I'm standing in, you know, 6 weeks. It just can't be done. And, you know, if you pressure me to tell you, like, I might tell you something, but it's going to be random. Like, it's not going to be actually correlated with reality, because that can't be done. So I think another part of what should change, I think, is for us to get a lot more comfortable with not knowing, because that's more correct. You get farther by not confusing yourself that you do know certain things than to pretend you do.
No, I don't disagree with you, and I think that's the whole sense making apparatus. There is building that into your brain, getting comfortable with it. Completely agree. However, let me posit something else. Apply that to something like mathematics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
All right, if GPT-3, and I know I'm getting a little dorky on, you know, like, oh, GPT-3 is going to be incredible. I'm setting that aside. If there's a way that, you know, there's a 20-year-old kid in Moldova who wants to learn what a Fourier transformation is, and he goes onto the net to figure it out, and he types it into whatever, a Google search bar, an AI chatbot, whatever. But there's such a flood of information that, I mean, and you know, math is math. 1 + 1 = 2, unless you're based in California. So and somebody's put a million different articles. They've brute forced a million articles that say that the Fourier transformation is x plus y plus z squared over the square root of 5 instead of the square root of 4, right? And then that just completely fucks up. I mean, that's not sense making. That's just, I mean, you can, that has real world consequences. How do you protect? How do you see something like that playing out?
That's what I'm saying. We need protected, trusted sense-making structures. This idea that the internet is there and we can all just go out there and find answers without knowing the provenance of that information, without having a web of trust overlaid on it, is insane. And it can only work for a little bit of time until people figure out how to exploit that for profit. Arguably, they already have.
Yes.
And that's that. It's over. Like, we need to I need to know who I trust, and they need to know who they trust, and they need to know who they trust, et cetera, so that when I have a high level conclusion, I can trace it all the way down to, elemental facts. And on each jump on that tree, not only do I sort of say, okay, well, this fact breaks down to those facts, but I can also map it like, Dave told me this, and Dave trusts this expert in finance that he vouches for, right? Not expert globally, but from your point of view, and I trust you, and therefore, I transitively trust this person I've maybe never heard of. And that's how you build pyramids of high level conclusions where everything is protected, right? There must be skin in the game. Right. And that skin in the game is that if if I trust you and I make a conclusion and that conclusion is shit, I'm going to be like, well, I guess I'm not trusting Dave next time around. And that's how it has to go. There has to be a feedback loop. It can't, again, this thing where
there has to be consequences to making false predictions.
Yeah, like this idea of like, well, we followed the process and the process gave us a shit result. And I guess that means millions of you die in this pandemic. Like, that's not okay. It never has been okay. And the fact that you went by the book does not change that. Like, you just got it wrong. And that's that, right?
Okay, so let's go one level deeper. How do you think this ties into Balaji's theory that everything should be, complete anonymity? Well, I might be not saying exactly what he's saying. Yeah, overstating it. Thank you. But I mean, does there need to be a human element to it where you can actually trace this down to a physical human being and like not a background check, but you know where I'm going with this.
It could be an identity, so long as the identity can build enough trust to be trustworthy. I don't care if it's an algorithm or a human, right? I don't, or one of many identities of a certain human, or an amalgam, or whatever. Like, so long as
like a roller gator, right?
But roller gator is real, right? Like, he's more real than a lot of people with real names. He just happens to use a pseudonym. Much like, and I don't know if he's going to like that comparison, but much like Trump, right? Like, Trump is not really Trump is a brand more than a person per se, right? I don't know what he likes for breakfast or whatever, but it's a brand, and you kind of know what you're getting. I'm not going to go to Trump for statistics, but I will go to Rollergator because I know what I'm getting, even though I've never met the guy, right? And even when I didn't know his name, I had trust that identity would provide me good statistics expertise that checks out, right?
I think what you can do, because I know you've been doing the sense making over a number of different iterations in different places. Maybe you could rebrand it as consistent sense making, or sense making through consistency, right? Because that seems to be the thread.
It's trust and feedback. My current take, and this is probably overextended, is that feedback is truth. Like, we gotta cut the bullshit and just come back to reality and say feedback is truth. If I can't have feedback about it, it's how many it starts to sound like how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. Well,
Right.
you know, there's different opinions on that matter, different theologians, different whatever. But how would I know? You know what I mean? Like we're just arguing over things that we can't figure out. So it becomes pointless.
If you were Elon, would you, because this sounds like we're converging on something interesting, would you create a repurpose the truth and safety team to a dedicated feedback, what would you call it, calculation mechanism team?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Like, I mean, there's different ways to do it, right? You can do predictions. You can do each person assigns trust. You can do there's different ways to cut it. But I think it's essential that we have a way of feeding back to our experts, to our purported experts, about their own words in the future. Like the people, like right now, right? A pundit, when somebody's on CNN and says, "Oh man, like Twitter is not going to exist tomorrow. They fired so many people. Some essential teams have been fired. So by tomorrow, Twitter is just not going to be there." Okay, they're saying this. This is a prediction, right? This is a real world statement. Okay, what is going on in their heads? Are they thinking, if this doesn't happen, this is going to go on my record, I better watch my mouth? Or are they thinking, well, this is going to play well to the audience of this television station, and even if I don't get it right, I'm going to be invited back? Which one of these two logics is dominating, right?
Sure.
I suspect it's the latter. So whatever it is we need to do, we need them to be thinking at the time when they're saying these things that this is going to go on their record, and that they can't just open their mouth and spout things because they're going to look bad.
There needs to be skin in the game. I know how much you love Taleb. Sorry, funny joke there.
Yeah, but, he needs skin in the game too.
Yeah, I think you're right. No, so I've always likened Twitter back in the day, maybe 10 years ago. I was, it doesn't matter. I've always likened it to the drive-by shooting version of commentating, right? Because you just go by, you shout out some words, and there's no consequences. You just run away. So okay, let's ideate on this just a little bit, if you would be so kind. What would it distill down to if you were the head of the the feedback loop mechanism team under Elon? Would it be distilled down to a statistical value, like this person has been right only 50% of the time, or is it more of a, is there something else there?
You can't do that, because to do that you still need a global source of truth, and that doesn't exist.
Right. That's what I was saying.
So it has to go back to what you evaluate as true, right? So the way this gets messy for people, but I still think it's true and actionable. If I say, let's say I join this kind of new Twitter, right? And it says, okay, Alex, do you think there were or there weren't WMDs in Iraq? And I'm like, from all I've seen, I haven't really seen any evidence that there was, right? And it goes back to before the invasion, and finds all the people that says that there were, and just marks those people down based on what I told it today. Now, I could say yes, right? Yes, there was. And I will get a garbage Twitter, and I deserve a garbage Twitter, because I am failing to authenticate basic facts about reality. But the only thing this whole thing can do is help you leverage basic things about reality that you yourself can either answer or, even better, validate, right? Like the weather. The weather is easy, right? Like if it says okay, can you go outside and check if it's raining where you are? And I'm like, yep, it's raining. Okay, cool. So everybody who said it wasn't raining goes down, and everybody who said it is raining goes up. It would be raining.
It's kind of like you assign yourself an intelligence score, like Dungeons and Dragons, essentially based on your predictions. Okay, I like that.
Well, you assign the world, you assign the graph essentially a set of values, based on the fact that you are now in the future and can time travel to the past and say, okay, who predicted this, right? But you have to be the one that validates the facts you put in, because that's the thing. There is no oracle. You just, whenever you posit an oracle, your whole system will collapse in very well understandable ways. But if there can be a system that can help you bootstrap a little bit of knowledge about reality into a lot more knowledge about reality. I think that's feasible. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say you can backtest essentially everybody who has used Twitter up until the formation of the feedback loop mechanism team. You can backtest everybody there. New people, how do they? What would be your solution for somebody who's
So this is a thing that would happen.
Go ahead.
This is a thing that would happen continuously, right? So it's not a thing you do once. You keep adding things that you believe to be true, and the system would continue to weigh different sources based on their predictions of those things in the past. And gradually, hopefully, this will gravitate you to the truth, which of course cannot be ever fully attained. But that's what I'm saying. I can get us to 99%. I can't get us to 100. And everybody, but I have a stronger position than that. I think anybody who believes that you can get to 100 is lying.
I completely agree with you. All right, here's an idea. I'm just spitballing here. What if you as the head of this new
Yule
function. Wait, say that again. I talked over you.
No, I'm saying like the new Yoel Roth, like the guy who was leading the custom safety team. Yeah, right, I need to get myself some lattes, glasses.
No, it's called the
trendy t-shirts.
It's called the NYT, the new Yoel team.
The new Yoel team. That's right.
All right. How about this? Do you think that there would be a we should make people to force function this skin in the game, make these services like a Twitter, something that you have to work to be a part of. So, in order to force the sense-making function to the algorithm to have enough data, every time you log into Twitter, before you're able to see your feed, it prompts you with, did you think this is real or not real? Just as a very, very crude example.
Well, sorry, can you give me an example?
So I log into Twitter, and in order to feed this NYT team, the new Yoel team, with the skin in the game, factor, and in order to force the users to show their sense-making ability, you ask them a question at the beginning. So every time I open up the Twitter app, there's going to be a very simple yes/no poll. And again, I'm being very crude here. That says, do you think that, do you believe that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Right? And so you kind of make people work to be part of the system. So, because there's a lot of people who come onto it, or maybe it's every time you're about to tweet something. Well, that's way too much, but just something simple like that. Does that make sense? Am I?
Well, the thing is that what I'm describing to you is a fusion between prediction markets and reputation systems, right? And the important part here is that prediction markets use money, and money is absolute, right? You either have $10 or you don't. Whereas reputation is social, right? So you could be well reputed by me, but not well reputed by somebody else. And I think essentially that's what we need. We need prediction markets that work with reputation as currency, so that there can be fluidity in the system that money itself doesn't really allow for. So I think any attempt to secure some sort of a global truth will fail. Like you can get, because reality, our understanding of reality is intersubjective, to put it philosophically, but the point being that we're all sort of incrementing towards something, and we can be mostly correct. Most of us can be mostly correct most of the time, right? But you just can't push past that point. It's like wanting to make the perfect suspension that has no up and down when you go over a hill. It's like
Right.
over a bump on the road. It's like you can make it super smooth, but if you tell me to like have no bump, um, you know that invalidates most any solution I can come up with, right? Like you can borrow from here, you can borrow from there, but you can't make it flat. So that's kind of the thing I'm talking about. You have to accept a little bit of error, and then you can go a very long way. I don't know. I realize I'm not sounding very
No. I
precise,
think we're.
but
I think you're absolutely precise. I guess what I'm saying is the mechanics of it in terms of. Sorry, that's a bad pun on the suspension thing, but um, the mechanics of it. So we're on the same page in terms of the reputation, rather than in terms of the prediction system, rather than the cache. But in order to maybe not just bootstrap it, but to really assign those values, because it's
yeah,
all going to come down to a value, is to um, f- force people who use the system, so people who use Twitter, to maybe it's a daily basis, maybe it's every time they log in, to make a prediction, right?
yeah. So
Um,
instead of forcing them, I would incentivize by saying that the more truths or predictions or those kinds of things
uh,
they put into the system, the more the graph will improve for them, like selfishly, not some sort of altruistic
right,
spiel, but just say like if you want the best for you, like the more you feed us, the more we can align the graph based on truths that So
right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the way that my thinking goes, and I haven't formulated these thoughts nearly as well as many of the people here, but yourself included. But I guess where my mind goes is, if if when you say the word more, all right, now that comes down to a function of absolute value. And so if I'm Xi Jinping, and I want to force the graph to consolidate on the view that actually 1 + 1 = 3, I can get 200 million Chinese people to just go for it.
Yep.
Whereas if
But you
you
can't
force,
make me trust them, right? That's the thing. You can't force me to trust them. What would
right,
happen if you did that? And this is basically exactly what the system is designed for. If you get a number of a voting ring, right, like a number of actors in the system, that it could be bots, it doesn't have to be real people, but they reinforce each other's predictions or whatever,
right,
is that they end up with a tight cluster that floats away because everybody else systematically cuts their ties with that island, right? Since bullshit is coming out of that island, right?
but
So
that's the
the
thing.
rest of the graph will separate from that graph because that graph is systematically producing untruths.
Okay, well, let me push back ever so slightly. So, I guess what I'm saying is, if you force every user to do something, then you get a real consensus of everybody.
There's
But
no
if you
there's
do
no
it,
such thing as consensus. That's what I'm saying. You have to give up. These are objective style concepts that you have to give up.
well, one could
It's
say
it's
not
it's
all.
every
One
man,
could
it's
say,
every man, woman, and child for themselves.
but put us, all right. So let's put us in the very very beginning days of COVID, where I do think a lot of people, um, you know, most of them, the majority of people, believed that it came out of a wet market instead of the WIV. So in those novel situations, you can actually, if a bad actor, or a very large set of bad actors, could game the system to, and then what happens after that is, because you're in novel territory, you can game the system such that
But you can't. Like you're thinking about it in terms of voting, or like a large number of actors does nothing, right? Because they have to get into my trust graph somehow. I wouldn't be trusting those people, so they would not affect, what I would be seeing. What
But so
what
I guess
what you're
this is my
describing
question.
actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
what you're describing is what actually happened in reality in this pandemic, which is that you have Dashak and a number of other people who had institutional trusts, right? Leverage that into the Lancet. From the Lancet, they put out a statement. From that statement, they leverage that further to go into Nature. From Nature, they leverage further to sway the WHO, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't involved in any of that. Right.
Right.
I got that, foisted on me, and everybody got it through their TVs. But if I had my own trust graph, then there would have to be a leak somewhere for them to enter. Right. And if I was keeping my graph, tight, they wouldn't find a way to get in.
Okay.
What actually happened is that our civilization has outsourced our trust graph to institutions, and with institutions there is well understood ways of manipulating their trust graph, and therefore we are all being manipulated in ways that we have spent the last few years discussing. I want to give Brett the mic as well. He's been here for a while.
Hey everybody.
Hey.
Good to talk. Yeah, it's a really good conversation about sort of the architecture of information and trust. And, I think Alon put it well in a tweet yesterday, or maybe in the last couple of days, about, Twitter has the potential to be at least a major part of, being the major news source of trusted news or information or whatever you want to say. And I think he understands that you really, I think, need a few very simple rules for a complex world. And the more you try to impose the structure from the top, the less well that your information system is going to work. And so the problem with, one problem, just from a purely architectural point, of all these social media companies having these trust and safety teams and trying to content moderate billions of users from the top down, and as we've seen, all of their policies, which they don't follow, but their terms of service over the years have just gotten more and more complex and bloated. It's because what they're trying to do, even in the best of worlds, even if we grant them total benevolence, what they're trying to do is impossible, right? There's too much complexity for them to govern in a top-down way. And so, what I think we want from Twitter is to provide a basic fundamental platform, and then underneath that, with some just very basic structure and rules, and then underneath that, you want loads of interconnected webs of humans and databases and institutions. Some of these will be formal, some of them will be informal groups, all, as Alexandros was saying, imposing and changing upon feedback loops and incentives, and gradually pushing in the right direction and downgrading some and upgrading others. But it's got to be an organic process where you're building these more complex structures on top of basically a simple framework, and it's always changing and always dynamic. And does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me, and I think we've there's something about the modern era that has somehow guilted judgment, right? They call it kind of bias instead, and they're like, oh well, you couldn't, like if you do a job interview, right? And you're like, yeah, this isn't a good person. It's like, well, was that a biased decision, or was it, and I mean, of course, there's always situations you can pull up where it was a biased decision, right? Like it's not. I'm not saying this has never happened, but I'm saying that we have now taken the edge cases and turned them into the default sort of judgment for using our brains to discern. And somehow algorithms have come in as the savior here, who are perfectly cold and calculating and whatever, and they can take all the information and come up with these objective quote unquote answers. And I think that this is a terrible idea. It really truly cannot get worse than that. And I'm saying this as a person who does algorithms for a living. Like, this has been my, I've been on the internet since, like, I don't know, 93 or something. And, so I understand online communities and I understand algorithms. And I can tell you, like, that's not what they're for. They don't have some magical access to objectivity. And I think we got to get back to, the fact that trusting our gut is a thing that we should value. And feedback loops, and skin in the game, right? Consequences for your actions. All these things have to come back into vogue. And this sort of illusion that, like, some magical algorithm concocted in some basement in Silicon Valley is going to come out and, like, it'll be the truth box or whatever. That is not possible. We got to give up on that. So then, yeah, as you were saying, Brett, like, it's the question is, like, what do we do instead, right? And how do we negotiate as a brain of brains, right? Like, if each of us is a neuron in a sort of this massive network, how do we negotiate the weights we provide to each other so that information can flow? Again, it won't be in the optimal path, but it will be near optimal. And if you're comparing to what's happening today, it will be, billions of times faster and better. Just because we're starting from a low, initial point. But that's the sort of thing that I think is worth it. I'm not sure Elon fully gets it yet, to be completely honest. I think he is feeling his way around that idea, and this is why I burst out when I see, like, an idiot like Mark Cuban saying, like, oh yeah, get the top 1,000 doctors, man, to
Right.
tell you what's happening with vaccines, because, like, I worry that it superficially sounds good enough that Elon might be like, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that, or whatever, right? I'm kind of at the edge of my seat, really, seeing how Elon is going to play the whole COVID part of the story. I'm not sure he's gonna. I know his heart's in the right place. I know he, I'm reasonably confident anyway that he wants to do it right. But these are genuinely hard problems, and I'm not yet sure that he fully understands the nature of the problem. That's it. That's the thing.
Yeah, really good points. And I think the same thing about Elon. Some of his polls that he did, right? Should you let Trump back on? There have been a couple other ones in which, his Vox Populi Vox Day thing, which, if you sort of look at it through the lens of, this is just sort of a fun thing to get participation
Confirmatory,
on Twitter.
yeah, so
it
like
gives
that.
you some measure of feedback, but as we all know, you don't necessarily want pure democracy across any important platform. That would be a very bad way to run Twitter or actually make serious decisions. On the other hand, it can be a useful corrective to expose some of the big mistakes and glaring weaknesses of rigid institutions, which are very anti-democratic, right? So in that sense, you can see it has a function, but there's got to be a mix, just sort of like we have, say, in the United States Constitution, right? There's a mix of democracy and overlapping, checks and balances at different layers. And so, I can see where you don't want him to take the pure democracy thing too far.
No, I mean, I really don't. And like, again, I think I read his actions differently than most people. Maybe because I've been watching him for a long time, but I see him as iterating and trying stuff out, learning, and then throwing. So somebody will be like, "Well, but he said this thing, a while back, and he's not doing that, so he lied." And, like, I understand why somebody would interpret it that way. My read is that that was that version. This is this version, and he's constantly iterating. But he doesn't communicate that clearly. Like he doesn't, say, yeah, that was the policy then. I'm not changing the policy. Blah, right? And also when it comes to moderation policies, that can't continue to fluctuate like this forever, or even for for a year. He really has to start firming things up. I really don't know where all this is going to go. I worry about certain things. At the same time, I've seen him solve more impossible problems than anybody else. So, he very well might end up um, finding his way through. The problem with what I'm describing is that it's complicated, right? It is not an easy thing to do. Never mind an easy thing to do on top of an existing structure like Twitter. And sometimes he tends to have some very interesting ideas that are a lot simpler than mine. Like I think the verification system, the way he describes it, cuts across some very interesting problems. For instance, so I don't know. Like I'm entertained watching what's happening. I'm somewhat like at the edge of my seat, kind of worried on occasion about things I hear. But I'm also constantly surprised and often positively by what I'm seeing. So I don't really know where it's all going to end up. It's hard to tell.
Well, he's definitely in the iteration phase right now.
Oh, for sure.
We always have to take a big step back and say it's only been 6 weeks, right? So, Jesus Christ, pardon my use of the Lord's name in vain. But what would be your? Well, I have two questions. One is a joke, and I'll tell that one first. What's the over/under on the number of days based on the Cuban thing that Bill Gates comes in and says, "I can run this better than Elon Musk"? Sorry, bad joke. But what's the over/under on when I mean, I would give the guy absolutely 24 months to figure this out. I mean, this is one of the most complex deals in the history of the entire world. I mean, and everybody's willing to put him on the fire, to put his head on a pike after just 3 or 4 weeks. Like, I would be completely fine with just everything being topsy turvy. Try this out, let it go wrong, fail fast for 2 years until I can make a judgment on what's happening here.
Agreed. I wrote this a while back that like I expect him to fail fast and iterate a lot. And I did that on purpose because I didn't I do a lot of like threads about like that are kind of defending Elon, but I didn't want people to sort of think that I'm expecting him to just come in and clean everything up and nail everything on day 2 and go home. This is going to be messy. That is 100% for sure. I mean, if it wasn't clear, a few weeks ago, it must be clear now. The benefit he has is that he is starting from a very low base, right? The fact that the child porn thing was just there for him to clean up and take credit for, right? And say like, okay, well, health and safety team or whatever you're called, what is it, trust and safety? Like, you had child porn on your service. Like, I don't care what you think you were doing. You had child porn. You can go quite far just slamming them for that one thing, right?
Has there been and I use this in quotes, major mainstream story, for instance, in the Wall Street Journal, outlining that very short-term success? I mean, that could be a huge,
I don't think so.
Publicity win for him.
Honestly, this is what
I take exception really quickly to Brett, what you said, mainstream. Is the Wall Street Journal mainstream anymore? I think it's like 5%. I think Twitter is the mainstream now.
I tried to use air quotes, even though have been a long time.
No, but you make a good point though, because it is mainstream in terms of what moves the halls of power, right? Like we out here may have a good sense, but like the Wall Street Journal still gets read in all the right or wrong places, as are the Times, as is the WAPO or whatever. And honestly, these people kind of shock me, but it feels like they've figured out that they can literally just ignore big events and nothing will happen. Like, it is wild to just watch them like say nothing about so many things that we know about. I mean, what was
Well,
it that was just not getting covered the other day?
as you're starting to
Oh
think
yeah, the
about it,
Twitter files.
go ahead.
They just didn't. They're just like, well, what if they didn't release that?
Well,
It's a genuinely
think
new
about
strategy where, there's always been bias. There's always been this and that. Obviously, lots of that's gotten much, much worse the last couple of years. But there is a genuinely new thing where the biggest outlets in the world will completely ignore for years huge stories. And it's just, it's like a tree, not falling in the proverbial woods, right?
guys, think about this. Think about this. Bloomberg terminals to this day are just, you log into one of those, right? And I mean, it's Wall Street Journal, it's New York Times, the Twitter information is not even on there, right? The conversation that we're having right now is completely lost from, I don't know how many Bloomberg terminals are out there. I have a friend who's the head of Bloomberg Japan, and I'm going to call him up in a couple hours when the sun wakes up here in Tokyo. But you know, it's just it's absolutely incredible. Think about the secondary and tertiary effects that are going to come in the next couple of years, maybe even in the next half a year, where people start to finally wake up to the fact that real conversations are happening here, and those trusted news sources are just complete bullshit. I mean, if I was Michael Bloomberg right now, or whoever runs it, he probably is just chilling and doing his philanthropy and other crap. But I mean, those things are going to just be turned complete. If they're not turned completely upside down, they have to be.
Well, the question is like, what does it cost them to be wrong, right? Because, and that's what I've been trying to figure out myself. Financially, like, it has to come back to money at some point, right? Like, if they can be, if they define reality, right, it doesn't matter what happens in the real world, because until it's written in one of the 5 papers that people pay attention to, it's not real, right? So where's the pushback? Where does it bite them if they don't get it right? That's the question that I've been wondering about a lot, and specifically, like, I've been thinking, like, is there a way to take their money? Basically, if we are saying that we are consistently better informed than they are, right? And I do believe that, but at the same time, I can't spot how to take their money, and that bothers me, right? Because that's an easy way to tell if I know better than somebody else, if I'm predicting better, and I don't see easy ways of taking their money. So there's a hole here in the argument, and
Alex, you saw what happened. That the New York Times is going to. I think it was like the whole. I'm gonna fudge the words here, but like the editorial staff or something like that is threatening to walk out in a week, right? I can almost guarantee you that it's. And again, I'm not gonna. So going back to your prediction markets, maybe I won't make it onto your trust draft after I get this one wrong. but it has to be coming from the bottom up, because these people must be like on this dig your own rabbit hole Twitter space right now, listening to us talk and saying, we're not just going to put up with, promoting a narrative anymore, because we know that reality is not based in a top-down narrative. It's based in the bottom up, these Twitter spaces. And so maybe that's why when I saw that headline, the first thing I thought was, is this real? But the second thing that I thought was, if it is real, it's probably based on the conversations that we're all having, and they're revolting against it. And so it is going to fuck with their money in an indirect way. It's going to fuck with their ability to make money, because the people on the ground know that this is all, a house of lies. That's how I like to think about it.
I don't know. I think what I heard about it, though, again, like, I probably heard about it through the same people that I shouldn't be trusting, is that this is like a labor dispute around, like, they want to increase their base pay, and Schlossenberger, or whatever his name is like, y'all are millennial writers, I can get another batch of y'all really quickly. And why don't you go to work at Semaphore, and I'll still be the New York Times when you're done. Why would I pay you more for this garbage? I think that was the dispute as I saw it. So it's almost weird, like it's almost the exact opposite of what we're talking about, where these people were like, "Hey, we are more valuable than you think," and the owner is like, "Not really."
That's a really interesting way to put it. Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, well, you're not really valuing our contributions," and he's like, "I'm already overvaluing your contributions."
Well,
You know what I mean? It's like I can find writers like you, all day long. You're not anyway, but it's almost like my sense was that it wasn't that they're waking up; it's that they're more asleep than I thought. But again,
right.
I might be wrong because, I haven't. I don't know what my sources for that were. I just kind of read that story floating around.
Well, no, I actually think you're very right, because the CEOs of these companies, the people who have money in our society right now, especially with the inflation shit that's going on, um, have they have way more staying power than the people on the ground, and so this is not the time to stick to your principles, right? If you're making 90K a year, or even 150, or 200K a year, when you can be expendable, and you got to worry about, like the previous speaker was speaking about, your kids and all that stuff. I mean, these people are not going to be holding fast to their morals or trying to create change in the world today, because they're all worried about, are they going to be able to pay the gas bill when it gets really, really cold in New York in a couple months time. So yeah, no, I that's a really good point. I agree with you.
I think if I was what's his name anyway, I would be running test opinion polls with via what's it called, um, chat GPT, just to lay down the law. So this opinion piece was written by AI.
Yeah,
Right.
and back to the how to make money on this, the investing question, because I think that does, at the end, a lot of times it does come down to the money doesn't lie, or at least it shouldn't. I think in the last how many ever years, you've seen a lot of doubling and tripling down on mistruths, false narratives, because the consequences for being wrong are so gigantic. And so they've filled a lot of these holes, in some cases with just lots of money, right? Which, whether it was, getting all the governments around the world to purchase, unlimited numbers of pharmaceutical products, or whether it was injecting $10 trillion into the economy to sort of paper over the lockdowns. And those can hide a lot of problems for a while, and they can make your bets against their bad information not work for a while. But then,
exactly.
Right. But then, we did see there's always going to be the result at some point. And now the last year, we've seen a big jump in inflation, right, and a huge change in bond prices. And so they're still going to do this, and I think I've been surprised at the lengths that they're going to sort of break all the previous norms in order to paper over. But it's but we're just gonna have to be more creative about sort of looking at second, third, fourth order effects.
Yeah, I think, as you're putting it exactly right. As I'm gonna come across here as a sort of dyed in the wool libertarian, and I guess that might not be completely incorrect, but I do think that the Fed printing money is at the root of a lot of wrongness, right?
Yeah.
Because it can buffer people being wrong for a long time, because you can keep doubling down, right? If you got money coming in, you can keep playing double or nothing for quite a while before you run out of money. And you look.
It's not that money doesn't lie. It's about it. How much money does it take to lie these days, right?
Right, and when the money is coming in, then you can lie quite creatively, and flamboyantly. Like you can literally ignore entire events because you're like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like our readership might drop, but then we'll get a grant for COVID advertising from the government, right? And that's probably worth more. So whatever, you can keep pushing past the breaking points of the system as they were previously understood because of this liquidity, the coming, I mean, a lot of the FTX bullshit, for instance, is probably traceable to zero rates flooding crypto with money, right? Like you can tell that story 100 different times, 100 different ways, and always come back to just the market being flooded with liquidity means that the sense making market is flooded with lies. Until demand and supply meet in the worst possible way.
We should have a prediction market poll on Twitter that says how much money does it take to make Taylor Lorenz lie?
She'll do it for free. Yeah, but I mean, how much money does it make to, cause some of the things we saw in the pandemic? Well, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? I mean, again, this is kind of libertarian talking points, fair enough. But that's the whole thing with the housing crisis and 2008, right? And bailing out all these too big to fail institutions and not reforming them. All these lies were rewarded essentially. A lot of people who did a lot of criminal things went home with honorable pensions and pat on the back because we could have the government could afford to do that. But you do run out of the ability to do that at some point.
We're playing a big game of musical chairs, and when the music stops and there's 7 people but there's only 6 chairs. And the stakes are really high, then what are people going to do to get a seat in one of those chairs, right?
Yeah, it's a fascinating game. I don't know. Like, I guess the way we're describing it now, the story of who actually gets caught, it happens collectively. It's not the sort of game you can win individually, but there must be a way to win individually as well.
I was so surprised. In terms of the person who's going to get caught, I kind of think of it as a sacrificial lamb thing. I was so, and here's why I won't make it onto your trust graph or Brett's either, or most of the people here.
It's a very low bar, by the
way. I was so surprised that Fauci wasn't the sacrificial lamb. He wasn't like
he fucking made it through,
right? What the fuck happened?
He made it. I mean, I thought with the puppies, when that whole thing with the puppies, I wasn't like 100% he's going to get nailed now, but I gave it a good 20 or 30% that that was going to be, kind of with Petraeus with the lover and the photos or whatever, right? Like it's like this is what you're nailing him for, but it had to be something. So that was something, right? I thought the puppies were going to be that. But it wasn't. It just was like, we didn't really fund that. Trust us. And that worked. It's wild. It's wild. I think, again, right, like that mass formation was funded by the Fed. So I guess the problem is that I don't see any indication that they're going to back down on that.
I like what you just said. That mass formation and a lot of the mass formation was funded by the Fed. I think that's a profound and profoundly true idea.
Yeah, I mean, it takes money to put on a show like that, right? Like,
yeah.
It's high budget. This was not a high school play. I'll tell you that much. It was quite quite well done.
If it was a movie, it wasn't one of those indie movies like Watchmen that only cost $100K. Well, Watchmen took a little bit more than that, and then grossed like 50 million, right? I mean, it cost 50 billion, and it probably grossed them many multiples of that. So
yeah. Yeah. The problem with all of that is that it gets wonky, right? Like, it's not a problem that people are going to get fired up about. It's like in the UK, the Liberal Democrats went into co-government with the Tories, which was like a thing that they kind of had sworn never to do. The leader of that party, by the way, was Nick Clegg, who is the I think he leads like regulatory affairs or something for Facebook now. So make of that what you will. But they went into government with the Tories and they asked for one thing. They're like, all we want is a referendum on alternative vote versus, first past the post. And I think it was like a fair assessment to say, like, look, if we're going to shoot our shot here, we want one thing. And that one thing is to change the electoral system because we're getting fucked every single time, right? If we could, but, that referendum failed because most people just didn't give a shit. They lost, but also the turnout was like nothing, right? So that's what I worry about. Is like, you figured out the problem, you get all the way to the point where you have enough leverage to get something to happen, and it's a dud because people are like, why do I care about AV versus first past the post now? Like, what is that even? How does that relate to my life? And that's where it all comes down, because with the Fed, it's going to be the same thing. It's like, why do the Fed? Like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, it's a brainiac kind of issue that people don't feel visceral upset about.
I want to give Brett the stage to respond to that, but I do have a little bit of a digression back to the feedback loop function in Twitter, but
no, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to be dismissive, Alex, but what you just said kind of triggered something, just a little pattern matching in my brain. So
you can be dismissive if you want. It's fine.
I've never told anybody this, but I dismiss you all the time. I'm joking. So going back to that feedback loop function, do you think that given that there's a phenomenon such as TikTok, just as an example, if you force a skin in the game type of function into, let's just say, a Twitter, then people will not take to it because they're going to be kind of scared of the fact that they have to own up to their decisions or their predictions, and then that's going to just force people to go to the lowest common denominator. There was a really good Japanese anime that came out, a number of years ago. Everybody knows it, Ghost in the Shell, but there's a TV series built off of it, which is just way ahead of its time. And there was a really good quote in that that water just flows to the lowest levels, and so very, very cyber, 40, 50 years from now, technological society / dystopian future kind of idea. But essentially, it talks about a lot of these issues that we've been touching on for the past, couple of years with COVID and what we're talking about here. But yeah, I mean, if you force people to have skin in the game, do they just go to the next lowest denominator, the next, cheapest TikTok?
I mean, maybe, but the thing is that you don't need everybody to participate in this, right? You need a small number of, a small percentage, right, which is still a large number of people, but a small percentage to do that, and then you will notice that those people are just notably better at doing this, right? And they take your money. This is important.
Yeah.
Right. They are able to not only like pundit better, they are able to actually, invest better. They are actually better to predict better. They are actually better to sort of survive better, just do better at all the things they care about doing better at. Right. And at some point, you're like, well, you can always wirehead, right? You can always, put yourself on a morphine drip and just live out your days. But most of us don't want that, right? We want something that's hard, that's real, that's real life. And I think ultimately that's how how things settle. Like you don't want the life of a cow in a field that's just eating grass day in day out.
No, I agree. That's right. It becomes it organically becomes the central truth making organization.
And you know what? It has a much better claim at it than whatever it is that passes for our sense making institutions today, right? Like, how does Fauci know what he's talking about, right? Like, because he filtered it through some experts that he kind of sort of selected. Like, why would I trust? Like, there's that would have an answer to why should I trust this that this doesn't.
Well, we're already seeing it self-filter right now with people leaving, essentially the idiots leaving Twitter en masse, right? And it's only going to get better.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm not that optimistic. I think they're. My favorite one is like I think Apurva, whatever her name was, where she was like, "It's moving to Mastodon," like that. The continuous verb. It's like, have you moved, or will you move, or like, are you in the like? What kind of process are you following? Is it the process? Are you taking your things with you? Are you waiting for the truck? Like, what kind of moving is this? It's all very funny to me. I'm sure they. By the way, here's where this gets even better, right? Like, if they're making Mastodon better, that's good. That's good for us, right? Like for humanity. I mean,
Right.
us. Like we want alternatives to Twitter. We want the distributed systems. We want that even these people to sort of help find problems and help drive maturity of Mastodon and maybe drive funding and whatever. This is the most amazing thing about all of this is that this is a win-win as far from where I'm sitting. We either get Twitter free of censorship or Mastodon being better at being a distributed Twitter or both. Sign me up. Like, I'm just sitting here with, win, win, win. I mean, there's no,
Fuck yeah.
What's the downside here? Sorry, am I supposed to be upset about, these people putting their money where their mouth is and trying to help bootstrap an alternative platform? No. I'm very happy, that for once they're actually trying to put their words into actions. And if they are happier there, then that's what they should do. And, we should all figure out how the dice falls in the end. Like, that's what's great about it. Like, I'm not unhappy that they're, trying something. I praise it. Now, the fact that they're doing it in a way that is, passive aggressive and in a bid to sort of delegitimize Twitter is a bit iffy. But Jonathan Haidt is part of that whole shtick, right? So, I'd much rather focus on him. I was expecting something from him than these people.
Yeah. There's a lot to say on the last 2 points here. The big problem we've had recently is that as opposed to feedback loops or et cetera, the institutions that we've had are sort of operating in a interlocking web of accountability avoidance, right? You can see that with COVID. You can see that with the way that most of the big institutions are handling the SBF story. Partly
that's the other one.
They were
that
in
doesn't
on
exist.
they were in on it from the beginning. So now they're all sort of protecting him and each other, and so forth. Where was I going with this? But that's also the reason why they are so upset and intolerant of the people that are getting things right, because they don't want to be made to look foolish, right? So you got now they're setting up these new institutions, and this goes back to the sort of information infrastructure, which they are very much ahead of the game on this. And I'm referring to this new NSF grant for this hacks and hackers program, where
so I kind of know that organization, by the way. It's kind of funny that it came up, but
really?
Anyway, keep going. Yeah, I'll tell you afterwards.
So now they're funding a new it's kind of one of these misinformation groups where they're going to teach regular people how to respond to their friends who are passing along so-called misinformation, and they specifically mentioned that they need to target people like Brett Weinstein and others. And it's because the people that have found some perhaps better sense making methods are starting to make some inroads, and that's totally intolerable. Now, the other facet of this is that, and again, this is just one of many. It's a huge web of programs and institutions across this new sort of, misinformation research and advocacy space. The other problem, though, and this gets back to the making money part, is that they can paper over things for longer than I certainly thought, and in a bunch of different ways and on a bunch of different topics. At the same time, that will tend to build up the systemic risks, and it'll tend to build up the blindness of the people that are doing the censoring, so that they are sort of thickening their own information bubble, right?
Yep.
Where they can't see, and it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And just like any, a financial bubble or whatever, the bigger that inflates, and the more that they are convinced of their own
Righteousness.
informatious righteousness, and the longer that goes on, that means that the bigger the reversal could be, and thus the bigger the opportunities could be.
Yeah.
Brett, that goes straight into something that I really wanted to talk to you guys about, which was the Rollergator and Lindsay pod on Benjamin Boyce. Rollergator has it at 2 years. Lindsay is talking about it's only going to be a matter of a few more months. Where do you guys come out on that, Alex?
I did not see that or hear.
I have no idea. The problem I have with quote unquote our side is that we don't have alternatives, right? Let's say it all blew up today.
Yeah.
What would we do? Well, we would set up another federal government, right? And that would have the same problems, a few years out. So maybe you bought yourself a couple of years. The problem is that we don't, we don't have. I don't see them anyway. Counter proposals to make that are well formed, that are functional, that it can be used today. So if this whole system comes crashing down, what do we replace it with? I can't. I mean, I've sketched out my best answer on this call, but that's words by a dude on a Twitter space. That's not an institution that can be instantiated tomorrow, right? And I'm reasonably well aware of the space, and it's pretty slim pickings. It's not like we got all the solutions ready to go. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right? That if it does blow up for whatever that means, right? That basically at this point blows up means they run out of capability to double down, because this is the thing that I wanted to mention to what Brett said, which is that if you see the Twitter files, right, like me, it's the utter banality of evil that was what shone through the brightest, right? These was people thinking they were doing their jobs, mostly, kind of bending the rules here and there, but that's all in the service of the greater good. And that's what we did anyway. So now we're going to stick with it, kind of thing, right? It was a day at the office, basically. It wasn't like some smoke-filled room. Maybe Vijaya got a call or whatever, right? We don't really know what was at the tip of that iceberg, but the body of the iceberg was a lot of just blinded people not really realizing what they were doing or the meaning of it, or the essence of their importance in a sense-making universe of institutions, or blah blah blah, whatever. It was more like, I don't think this is any good. I think we should just suppress it. How hard can we suppress it? Well, there's all these knobs we got over here for child porn. Yeah, let's press those. Okay, cool. Like that, that's the level of discourse that was applied to this conversation that was, historic. We're over here being like, you can't just fucking do that, and they're over there and they're like, no, I will correct you, sir. I believe I just did. Like that's,
Right.
that's the level of discourse, right? That is going on. And from their point of view, yeah, they could be that blind because they were already blinded and they blinded others through their own blindness, right? So how far does that go? It's where does the system run out of capability to double down? And it's a big system, it's a rich system, it's a successful system. It could well have years of doubling down. We're maiming kids at this moment, and we're not really sure if that's I just learned that some people we know named their daughter with a name that is easy to like also be a male name just in case. And I'm like,
oh my God,
you gotta be fucking kidding me. Like, okay, this might be an edge case again, but like that cannot be a consideration when you're naming your child.
It's like, oh yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like, this is just an idea that I'm formatting in my mind right now, listening to you talk. But it's like, you say they're blind. They've got the blindfold on, but it's a blindfold, and it's kind of like, in the U.S. everybody wears, well, they used to wear masks with like some sort of like a slogan on them. The slogan on these blindfolds should just have the word "my incentives" on it, right? Because that's all that it is. My monetary incentives. I mean,
Some people, right? But most people, this cuts against their incentives. But their information ecosystem is so poisoned that they basically can't even see their own good. And again, that's the part where I think you can't do that forever. People will eventually wake up to their own good. When you get to, and this is where Lindsay's thing goes, right? When you start messing with people's children, people wake up. But again, I'm in Seattle, right? So this is mass formation central in a way. But I don't see it here. People are still going along just fine.
I think it's just because, maybe it's not the financial incentives, but it's the incentive to not be demonized by the other midwits around you, right? Because
that's the thing. It requires a very long. I can have a conversation with these people, right? Like with, for instance, I have
I highly doubt that. I can't imagine you suffering a midwit.
No, like whatever. Like the thing is not me suffering them. It's just that
unless
it
you had
won't
a couple
work.
Martinis.
It won't work. It doesn't. I'm not very persuasive when I'm desperate to be persuasive. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
There's nothing I can say to somebody who doesn't want to listen that will make them listen. I'm not. There are people who are very charming and very disarming and very good at that. That's not me. But the point is, like, I know what that conversation sounds like, and these people have been inoculated against exactly that conversation, right? A conversation that starts with "You've been lied to by the New York Times" immediately puts me in a box where they won't listen to me, right?
Yeah,
because they've been told, right, by the New York Times, no conflict of interest, I'm sure, that doing your own research is a bad thing, and the people who talk about doing your own research, right, which is really doing your own thinking that we're talking about here, is somehow conspiratorial right-wing lunatics who want to invade the Capitol or something. I can't really put together that thought very well, but something like that.
Alex, can you? I DM'd you the. I'm gonna make a very rude request. I DM'd you the Lindsay roller gator on voice. Can you post that in the in the space here?
I don't. I think you can pin a tweet if you want to.
Yeah, I don't know how to. I'll do it. All right.
It's okay. People know how to Google roller gator and Lindsay on voice.
They'll find it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Brett?
Well, I was just going to say, I can't believe Alex says he's not charming. When you're at the drugstore or something and you see somebody, you just tell them to read your 27-part Substack, and they should be thrilled to do it.
That's right. That's right.
I mean,
That's right. You only have to read through my, at length deconstruction of evidence-based medicine, and then you'll be free.
That's right.
What's so tough about that's like my reasoning is always like kind of book solutions where I can sit you down and I can like walk you through the whole thing, but ultimately it's not punchy or anything. It's just like, yeah, so it doesn't work, so don't do that. It's a bad idea.
I do think it's a problem, and it's not an original insight, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to have basic conversations about any of this stuff because people are just starting from such polar ends.
Yeah.
So I know that's everybody feels that.
Which actually brings me to something interesting. This is why one of the reasons I want to push, the energy conversations we've been thinking about starting and stopping, because I feel like we should hold ourselves accountable to that and try to actually have a fact-based conversation about things we disagree about or we might disagree about. I don't even know if, whatever. I don't have that strong opinions. Because, ultimately that's where the rubber meets the road. Like, can we have? I'm not now, by the way, but like, can we have a fact-based conversation over here in Team Reality, or are we just also people who happen to agree on stuff and we all got together and are agreeing with each other violently, right? But if it came to something that we didn't, we'd be just as bad.
Alex, are you going back to the combo that we had on Rabbit Holes with Josh Floyd between you and him when you talk about energy based?
I've been teasing that conversation for a while with a few people. Josh is one of them. Yeah, Brett is another.
Yeah,
Brett has opinions as well.
I have my own.
Yeah, we should do it. I'm happy to.
We should absolutely. Do
yeah, we should figure out a way. Okay, I think I'm getting talked out.
Yep.
I'm gonna drop off. Thanks, guys. This is great.
Same for me. It was wonderful.
Good seeing everybody. Take care.